Frydenberg, though, says that that official rate doesn't take into account people who have left the workforce altogether or who are still employed but are working 0 hours. For example, people who are being supported by the JobKeeper wage subsidy. They still have that connection to their employer but aren't actually working at the moment. Mr. Frydenberg says that if those groups are taken into account, then the rate is actually higher than 13%.
The effective unemployment rate takes into account not only those who are officially unemployed, but also those who have left the labour force altogether, as well as those who are on 0 hours. And that's around 13.3% right now. So that's a large number of people reflecting the economic challenges that we see right now.
Jade, the second round of $750 payments are being made this week. Who's eligible?
Well, it's a narrower group of recipients than those who received the first $750 cash payment earlier this year. That's because people who are on Job Seeker and also Youth Allowance are already receiving the $550 a fortnight coronavirus supplement. So they won't get this extra $750, but around 5 million people will, and it includes people on the age pension, the disability support pension, and also the carers allowance, among others. Now, while this economic support measure is starting to flow from this week, another one is being wound up. The free childcare program that the government announced earlier this year to try to keep childcare centres afloat during the pandemic has come to an end. It means that from today, parents do have to start paying again for childcare services. Some operators say that they're relieved that they were actually left worse off under the free childcare arrangements. Some parents, though, are worried about how they're now going to be able to afford it. The government says that there is extra support on offer for parents whose jobs have been affected by COVID-19.
Jade McMillan reporting from Parliament House. Police are investigating whether a gas heater was responsible for a house fire which claimed the life of a baby girl southwest of Sydney. Reporter Tim Fernandez has more from Bargo.
Yeah, Karina, so we do understand that this fire that happened at 6:25 last night at this home behind me occurred with 5 occupants inside the premises. They were all part of the same family. There was a 27-year-old mother and her 2 infant children, as well as a grandfather and a great-grandmother. Now, we understand that the grandparents and the mother and an 18-month-old boy were able to escape from the premises, but tragically a 5-month-old baby girl was killed in the fire. There has been assistance provided to the parents and the family who are in deep shock and are just completely devastated by these events.
Yeah, fire investigators are at the scene. Do they know yet how the fire unfolded last night?
Yeah, so we understand the fire did happen at about 6:30 and moved very quickly through the house. Fire crews turned up and extinguished the blaze, but unfortunately that child was killed. We do understand that the first sign of the fire was from the room of the baby girl. There was smoke coming from under the door, and the grandfather, 57-year-old man, was the first person to notice the smoke coming from the room. He tried to enter the room to retrieve the child, but was unable to because of the smoke. They all left the house and were treated for smoke inhalation and various other lacerations and other injuries. We heard a bit earlier this morning from Camden Police, who suspect that a gas heater inside the child's room may have been responsible for the fire.
At this stage, it's too early to tell. There was an oil heater located inside the premises. However, we haven't established whether that was the cause of the fire at this stage. However, it is one avenue that we are looking at. We believe that the fire did start with the room the baby was located. The baby was asleep in the bassinet at the time, and I believe the grandfather first noticed smoke coming from that room.
Devastating scenes here at Bargo for this family who've tragically lost one of their family members this morning. Karina.
Tim Fernandez reporting. Overseas now, Florida has reported the highest single-day rise in coronavirus cases in any US state since the pandemic began. More than 15,000 cases were detected, which is more than any other state or European country has recorded in a day. The increase comes after Walt Disney World in Florida, America's most popular amusement park, moved forward with its partial reopening. Florida now has just short of 270,000 cases of COVID-19.
Well, I'm very concerned and have been concerned for quite a while. I can tell you that we did have a record number of tests as well yesterday, and so that can account for some of those new cases, but it doesn't mean that this is a quirk of testing. This means that we have this level of cases in the community, and we're just now starting to really identify how large our outbreak is in Florida. We have seen a rise in the number of deaths per day. We've been seeing a rise in cases since the beginning of June. And so now we know that deaths tend to lag about 2 or 3 weeks behind the new cases, but certainly we have seen deaths be added over the month of June. And unfortunately, I think we're going to continue to see that trend. We're tending to have somewhere in the neighborhood of between maybe about 50 to upwards of about 80 or so deaths per day, I think is where we are right now. You have to be concerned that we've got older people who are getting infected, and those are folks who are at higher risk of getting hospitalized and dying. And so the concern as you see this huge increase in cases is that you may see these deaths start to top out, well over 100 per day.
Debate is raging over whether face coverings should be mandatory in confined spaces in the UK. Like US President Donald Trump, the British Prime Minister Boris Johnson made headlines when he wore a mask in public for the first time. Europe correspondent Samantha Hawley reports.
To wear or not to wear, the messaging on masks in the UK is increasingly confusing. At the beginning of the pandemic, it was a definite no, amid shortages within hospitals and concern it could lead to a false sense of security among the public. Now, Boris Johnson is very keen.
I do think we need to be stricter in insisting that people wear face coverings in confined places where they are meeting people that they don't normally meet. So that's why it's mandatory already on public transport, and we're looking at ways of making sure that people really do really do have face coverings in shops, for instance, where there is a risk of transmission.
Boris Johnson himself emerged in public for the first time with a face covering on a few days before the US President Donald Trump. But there seems to be a split within the government over whether or not it should be mandatory to wear them in places like shops.
I don't think mandatory, no, but I would encourage people to wear face masks when they're inside in an environment where they're likely to be mixing with others and where the ventilation may not be as good as it might. So I think that it is basic good manners, courtesy, consideration to wear a face mask if you are, for example, in a shop.
Judging by the latest survey, Brits aren't too keen on wearing them, with only 50% of the population putting one on since the pandemic began. That's compared to 3/4 of people in places like France and Italy, and despite the rising death toll. Across the weekend, there were hundreds of more deaths, with the toll now edging very close to 45,000.
South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa has reintroduced a total ban on alcohol, which he says is putting additional pressure on the healthcare system at a time when coronavirus cases are surging. He also announced the return of an overnight curfew. Mr. Ramaphosa says the country's endurance is about to be sorely tested during what he called the coronavirus storm. South Africa has the world's 9th largest outbreak, with more than 264,000 cases and nearly 4,000 deaths.
For more than 120 days, we have succeeded in delaying the spread of a virus that is causing devastation in many countries around the world. We delayed the spread of the virus by working together and by maintaining our resolve as South Africans. But now, the surge in infections that we had been advised by our medical experts would come has now arrived. The storm is upon us. More than 250,000 South Africans have been infected with coronavirus, and we know that many more infections have gone undetected.
6 journalists, including 5 Australians, are being investigated by Malaysian authorities for a documentary on the plight of undocumented migrant workers during the COVID-19 pandemic. The Al Jazeera journalists are facing possible charges of sedition and defamation. Al Jazeera English Managing Director Giles Trendle says he's concerned about how a good outcome can be reached.
I speak to them regularly. They're all in good spirits. They don't feel they've done anything wrong. That I know that the Malaysian authorities were not happy with the film. The Malaysian authorities said that the documentary or the show was misleading and inaccurate and unfair. But the journalists in question, our journalists, are very experienced. This is an award-winning show. Actually, they're all former ABC. They're all, formerly before they joined Al Jazeera, they were all with ABC at one time or another. So they have a very good pedigree. We're very proud of them, and they know they've done nothing wrong. So they're holding firm, they're staying safe, and they're in good spirits. So the first few days were very tense, especially because of all the online abuse and death. In some cases, death threats. There was a lot of attempts at what they call doxing, whereby personal details. People try and get personal details and then post these online in a sort of style of a witch hunt to try and identify where they might be, where they're staying. They're safe. They're in safe locations. And we were heartened a few days ago when one of the Malaysian police chiefs came out and said that they would not be harmed, and that he made a call for people to, not make threats online, basically. Sedition and defamation, very serious charges, and we're very concerned about the allegations that were made about the documentary and their work being impugned in such a way. And we're concerned that they are facing an investigation and that their journalism might be criminalized and that they might be prosecuted. We're very concerned about that. And say their spirits are up and good, but there is great concern from all of us that where this is leading and where this ends.
Severe flooding has hit large areas of southern and central China, with the country's flood response alert raised to the 2nd highest level. Thousands of soldiers are working to shore up the banks of Lake Poyang, China's biggest freshwater lake. More than 200 rivers, including the Yangtze, are at record levels. Evacuations have begun in low-lying areas with more heavy rain forecast. More than 140 people have died or disappeared in the floods so far this year, with 28,000 homes lost. 21 people have been injured by an explosion and fire on board a ship at the US naval base in San Diego. The amphibious assault ship USS Bonhomme Richard was undergoing maintenance in dock when the blaze broke out. There were 160 people on board at the time. The US Navy says 17 sailors and 4 civilians were treated in hospital for minor injuries. The cause of the blaze is not yet known. Sue Lannon joins me now with finance news. Sue, one of those Melbourne aged care centres